Deputy Director at the Australia Institute. I want to begin by acknowledging that I live and work on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country and pay my respects to elders past and present and to the traditional owners of this land who've been around for around 65,000 years. I also want to welcome you all. This is a packed event. It sold out about a week ago, and we are absolutely delighted to see you all here this evening. Thank you so much for coming along. The Australia Institute, for those who are new, is one of the country's most influential independent think tanks. We do research that matters, and we try and spread big and good ideas all across the country. We really appreciate all your support. We are not government funded. We don't accept funding from political parties or big fossil fuel companies. We are supported by ordinary everyday people like yourselves chipping in, and you can make a donation this evening. I think we've got a little tap and go somewhere near the bar if you would like to make a contribution. Obviously, we've had a pretty big bombshell election result, and I know you're all absolutely delighted to get into it. Thank you again for coming along this evening. My two guests, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. Dr. Richard Dennis is Executive Director of the Australia Institute. Please give him a round of applause. And Amy Remeikis is a well-known journalist, formerly of Guardian Australia, now Chief Political Analyst at the Australia Institute, and host of our new and amazing live blog, which I hope many of you used to catch up with what was happening in the election during the campaign. Please give Amy a round of applause to welcome her. Yeah, if people can't find seats up the back, we've got 3 keen bean seats right here down the front. A couple of odd one-off solo ones for anyone travelling solo tonight. Obviously, it's been an absolutely enormous election result. Labor returned to government with a thumping majority. Just before I left the office this evening, it looked like it had been confirmed that the Greens leader, Bennett, had lost the seat of Melbourne. That was being reported in the news. I'm not sure if that's official from the AEC. So an absolutely, huge election. Richard, what are the big takeaways for people?
Well, the big takeaways are that the Liberal Party is pretty much done. I mean this. I'm not saying don't predict things that are impossible to predict. But after the 2022 election, after they'd lost their so-called heartland blue ribbon seats, after they lost their safest seats, a future generation of leaders, I thought, there's only a narrow path back to victory for them, and they spent 3 years marching in the exact opposite direction. Now, that's fine. It's a democracy. You can be as dumb as you want. And nothing they did made it easy for them to win back those seats. Maybe Tim Wilson in Goldstein did it on his personal appeal, or just the inimitable charm if you've met Tim. No, and that's some green shoot for Liberals there, that it's possible. It's possible to win one back. But nothing the Liberal National Party did structurally made winning those seats back possible. And without those seats, there's no path to forming a majority. Now they're a lot further away from that in a party where they've recorded the lowest ever primary vote for a so-called major party. They've got less seats now since 1946, and in 1946 there were half as many seats in Parliament. They don't have any seats in most of the major cities. And now Tim Wilson says, I'd like to be leader and let's stick with nuclear. I'm not making this up. Or, around half of their party room will be Queenslanders. Amy's a Queenslander. We'll get the Queensland perspective in a sec. But let's just do politics by the numbers. So the leader should come from Queensland. It'll be a bloke. If it's from Queensland, and probably half their front bench will be from Queensland.
Come on down, Ted O'Brien, leader of the Liberal Party.
So But seriously, how do a group of Queensland men pull together a political strategy that helps women who aren't in the Liberal Party yet win a seat in Sydney?
I've seen Queensland men barbecue. They're not pulling this together.
So, yeah, look, big picture, I think, Labor had a small swing to them and a big majority. That's because the Liberals just basically tanked their own campaign over 3 years, and then at the end, more independence. Here in Canberra, Labor, well, I'll wrap up on this point. Labor didn't lose a single seat to the Libs, not one. They nearly lost Bean, maybe they will. They nearly lost, woohoo! They nearly lost Fremantle, maybe they will. They nearly lost Wills, they didn't. They nearly lost Richmond, they didn't. So they didn't nearly lose any seats to the Libs. To the Nats. There's a very real chance at the next election Labor loses seats to the left, not to the right. So, yeah, this is a huge result. We're still getting our heads around it.
I was just going to say, and on the proportion of the vote, the last time I checked, I think Greens and Independents and more progressive parties got a higher proportion of the vote than the Liberal Party in every state except Queensland. Which is, when we're looking at this result and we look at Labor's thumping majority, it is easy to say, oh, well, Labor got a thumping majority. But as Richard's saying, when you look at the proportion of the vote, Labor had a slight increase in their primary vote. It's their second worst primary vote, the worst being in 2022. But they benefited from the preferential voting because the Liberal vote just was so completely cratered that all of those Liberal preferences flowed through them, because Liberal voters will most likely put a Labor MP ahead of a Greens MP or candidate. And so that happened in terms of when you break down the proportion of the vote. More people voted for progressive politics than the Liberal Party candidates in every state except Queensland. And that is a huge generational shift in Australian politics that is going to have a ripple-on effect where, yes, Labor is absolutely in danger of being outflanked on its left, but also that people are not necessarily as happy with the status quo as the result would necessarily show.
I was just going to interrupt before to say I am shocked that there is not more love for the Liberal Party here in Canberra, where they only threaten to sack 40-odd thousand people. But Amy, I did want to ask you about that vote and overall the showing that we've seen. Obviously, the Greens have gone backwards in the House of Reps, but did pretty well in the Senate, and I think increase their vote. But overall, talk to us a little bit about the Greens and Independents and how they fared at this election.
They didn't fare as well as people, I think, would have hoped in terms of having the balance of power in the House of Representatives. And I think that, even people like me who before the election knew that there was no chance of the coalition win or even coming close, even I underestimated just how far the Liberal vote would fall. And so when I was looking at the map, I was still imagining that the Liberal Party vote would decrease, but it would hold up enough that potentially Labor could fall, 1 or 2 seats short of a majority. Obviously, that was not the case because people saw who the Liberal Party were and voted completely against that. And that means that Greens and Independents have, in terms of seats representation in the House of Representatives, have suffered in terms of how many seats they have won. The Greens are going to have to find a new leader. That's not going to be an easy process for anyone who understands Greens party politics. It's not particularly one big happy family in there. The Greens are probably also going to have to make a decision for the near future because this vote has been so comprehensive that Labor is in power for 6 years. There is no way, unless there is some sort of unforeseen miracle, that enough seats flip at the next election for the coalition to come in any sort of shot of victory. They lost another dozen at this election. So they're in a lot of trouble generationally. But the Senate also looks like being progressive for the next 6 years, because the same thing has happened in terms of Senate representation. And so Labor will have to make a choice in whether it follows the people's will and goes through the progressive path that has been mapped out for them in the Senate, which would just be using the Greens party, or whether it tries to cobble together some weird conservative coalition in order to pass its legislation. And that'll tell you where the debate is going within the Labor Party. The debate within the Greens party is, do they maintain themselves as of the Senate, where they are the balance of power, they are the party of protest, they are the party that is going to push for legislation to be as progressive as it can, or do they try to keep moving to the centre to win House of Representatives seats and therefore compromise on some of those base ideals that exist within the Greens political party? And that's not easy for any party as it matures. It's a really difficult conversation to have, because you're going to disappoint large members of your base no matter what you do. But I think for the last 6 years, that's a conversation that the Greens have been trying to have while trying to do both. And they've probably ended up sort of disappointing everybody at one particular point of time if you're a Green supporter. For the independents, it's a little bit more interesting. I mean, obviously, Tim Wilson has won over Zoe Daniels. Monique Ryan had a tough time. That's also potentially circumstance as well. There are rather large pro-Israel communities in their electorates. Tim Wilson was literally running a campaign saying proudly a Zionist, which did help him in some quarters of his electorate of Goldstein. But also I think that there was just basically enough people there who might have voted, okay, 1 for Zoe, 2 for Tim, and then when all the votes were counted, the 2s for Tim's ended up getting him across the line. But we're all about to see what Tim Wilson's like, and that might help the independents in their next campaigns, because once you've seen what some of those Liberals that you kicked out are like all over again, suddenly you might have a little bit of buyer's remorse.
Richard, do you think it's worth just taking people through what has happened with the Greens vote in particular? Because obviously looks like it's gone up in the Senate, but didn't go back massively in the lower house. What's happened there?
Yeah, look, to be honest, I'm not quite sure yet. I'll tell you something I think will be really interesting that I don't know the answer to at the end. And then if people can beat me to do my homework, great. So the first thing is the Greens vote went up in the Senate. So the idea that, the Greens were on the nose and people hate the Greens and they got it all wrong because their vote went up, it's a bit hard to explain. Okay, so their vote went up in the Senate. And it was in the Senate where they were using their power. It was in the Senate where they were being obstructionist, because remember, Labor had a majority in the lower house. So in the chamber where the Greens could use their power to block things, having blocked some things, I'd have blocked some more, their vote went up. So that's kind of just fact one. We don't know what explains it, but it's not like all their voters walked away from them. They had more Senate voters than they did before. In the House, their vote was down about minus 0.5%. I haven't checked today, but let's say down 0.5% in the House. But their vote, like I think Adam's vote, I didn't look today, probably down 2%. And if it was up 2%, or if it hadn't have fallen 2%, he would have won. So that 2% made a big difference. So their Senate vote went up, but they lost a little bit in the seats that they already held. Well, Advance spent $5 million saying they were going to suppress the Green vote in the seats they already held. So there's a pretty testable hypothesis here that spending $5 million to suppress the Green vote in some small geographic areas might have worked. And it won't be too hard, I think, to figure that out for anyone quantitatively minded. And I haven't done this yet, is if you were advertising heavily in those Brisbane seats and Melbourne seats saying, oh, the Greens aren't what they used to be, and they're all aimed at kind of younger women and, right, aimed at core Green votes, I didn't get served many of them myself, so I don't know how many there were, but $5 million spent on 5 seats, that's a lot of money. If that suppression strategy worked, you'd think that the Senate vote in those electorates would be down too. Right? And the AEC can tell you for the seat of Bean, for the seat of Melbourne, for the seat of whatever, what the Senate vote in that electorate was. So that's an interesting fact I haven't collected yet. But given that their vote is up in the Senate, given that their vote didn't fall much in the House, but given that they lost the most votes in the seats where they already were, given that's exactly what Advance said they were going to spend $5 million trying to do, it's possible that Advance spent $5 million getting some Greens out and giving Labor a thumping majority and did nothing to help the Liberals.
Yeah, I mean, the Greens won those Brisbane seats in 2022 on very local issues as well. The flight path, one of them that was very successful for the Brisbane Greens. But this time, and while they were still running on we will change the flight path and things like that, there was also a lot more big picture things that they had to deal with, like housing and what they were going to do on there and getting dental into Medicare and those sorts of things, which became the primary campaign in Brisbane. And interestingly, if a Green manages to hold on to their seat, it'll be Elizabeth Watson-Brown in the seat of Ryan, which was traditionally a Liberal seat. And that's because it wasn't Labor Green in the fight, it was Liberal Green. And so then Labor may help Elizabeth maintain her Senate seat there. But also my friends who were in that electorate were getting a lot of advertising from, community coalitions that were being funded by Advance and others, it seemed like, in terms of when you dug a bit deeper, saying that the Greens were an evil anti-Semitic party. And that message was repeated by James McGrath on election night. And, it might have a few gasps in this room, and rightly so, because the Greens have been protesting against a genocide. But if you are not switched on to what is happening in politics or wider politics in terms of what is happening in the world, you don't necessarily know how to break up that message that is being told to you from what is happening. If you don't have the context, you're just like, ooh, that sounds bad. And from friends who were bombarded with advertising in the seat of Brisbane, in the seat of Griffith, and in the seat of Ryan, they were like, this was kind of everywhere, where it just gave, they think, some people hesitation in putting Greens one, because it just didn't feel right to them.
We're going to go to questions from the audience in about 10 or 15 minutes, so start thinking of your questions now. I'll call you all up to the mic here when we're ready to do that. Richard, you talked about how devastating this result was for the Liberal Party, that they're out of a lot of metro areas, looks like nothing at all in Tasmania, for example. Where do they go from here?
Further north into Queensland. Look,
I'm not sure we want them.
Eb knows I'm not being rude when I say this. I don't care. It's a them problem. And we all have to reorient our heads. Okay, the safe, there's, 50% of the time there's Labor and 50% of the time there's a coalition, and every now and then there's this chaos of minority. It's over. And if the Libs can sort their shit out, maybe in 6 or 9 years we'll be talking about them. But the biggest mistake that we can make is to spend the next month or the next 3 years wondering what the Liberals' nuclear policy will be. No, good, I'm glad you're laughing, because who cares? All right, can somebody ring the trumpet of patriots and ask them what their health policy is, all right? Who cares? And I don't think they can, but if they can find a way to get a whole bunch of Conservative blokes from Queensland to spend their time and resources and political capital putting together party political platform that can help Liberal women win back seats in Sydney, right? If you think that's what's going to happen, okay, right? But I don't. I think a whole bunch of Queensland blokes are going to do what Queensland blokes do and obsess, with that vision of the world and call the rest of us names.
Okay, well, it's mostly the Queensland Nationals,
Yeah.
not all Queensland blokes. I'm just going to stand
that's
up
true.
for...
Sorry. I mean in Parliament of that ilk. But you see what I mean? Like, that's their obsession, And can you imagine? Let's picture ourselves in a couple of months' time, and Parliament's back, and Liberals are forming their own little kind of policy committees, and Ted O'Brien and Barnaby Joyce and Tim Wilson sit down to start hatching their 2028 energy policy. Who cares?
And Angus Taylor.
And Angus. Right. So the reason I'm saying all this is because, like, on the ABC on Monday night, 7:30 report, hour-long broadcast, opening statement from host of 7:30 report,
Sarah Ferguson.
Sarah Ferguson. And tonight, the most shocking thing. Oh, can you believe on the ABC 7:30? The kind of doyen of Australian politics, Paul Kelly from The Australian, said, literally, the ABC 7:30 report started by telling me what some old bloke in the Oz wrote. Stop it. No, you get like the ABC, put it down. Stop talking about the Liberals' nuclear policy. It doesn't matter. It's not a thing. What percentage of the ABC's time should now be given to these people? Not much.
About 30%.
Maybe at most. Right, but you see what I mean? Like, we're stuck in this idea of Labor versus the coalition and the contest. No, they lost. And then they lost again so bad. Remember, after Morrison lost in 2022, we thought Dutton would need 2 terms to get back. Well, they just went back 12. Okay? They just went back 12 from it's going to be 2 terms to get back from there. So this is a big, I'm 55, you'd never guess. My whole adult political life, that contest is the context that mattered in Australia. But it's not obvious that that's the contest that matters in the next 10 or 20 years. It might, but the most conservative thought you can have is, I wonder what the Liberals are doing. Because there's a majority Labor government that can't lose to the Liberals at the next election. And the Labor government and the Greens can pass any bill they both agree on through the House. So we could spend the next 3 years figuring out what Labor wants to do that the Greens will support, or we could spend 3 years wondering about the Liberals' energy policy, or how they feel about welcome to country.
Amy, building on that point, Labor does have a thumping majority. It's got a pathway through the Senate to pass whatever it can agree on with the Greens. What's the sense from Labor in these early days about its priorities and how much it wants to take that majority out for a spin?
I mean, Anthony Albanese answered that question by saying the first thing he would do would be the 20% cut to HECS, and you can take from that Labor's first priority will be doing what they said that they would do at the election, which is not a hell of a lot to materially help change people's lives for the better. I think we can maybe, I never thought I'd hear myself say this, give them some grace in how they settle into this new political climate, because they are still thinking about it in the old binary terms, where it's not just the Liberal Party, could necessarily destroy them, but also News Corp. And the other thing that came out of this election is that News Corp's cultural relevancy is also fairly dead, because the only place that they did, had any sort of influence on Sky After Dark was helping the Liberal Party destroy itself. And I'm still not convinced that it's not some sort of long-term embedded espionage project where you just have Peter Credlin being all like, yes, go further to the right. So Labor has to adjust to this, and Labor is skittish. Anthony Albanese says himself that he is a reformer, not a revolutionary, but he's been of the mind that you need to do slow reform. But we've done the fuck around period, and now we're in the finding out period. And as someone who is of a generation of the finding out period, nobody has patience for slow reform anymore. And there is nothing to stop Labor from actually doing Labor things and upholding the Labor platform and doing what Labor's members want it to do, except for Labor. And so they're having this argument at the moment within the party where you have the Labor right, which includes such powerhouses as Don Farrell, talking about softly, softly, gentle, gentle. And then you have some more within Labor on the left, but just also who are just kind of looking at their own left flanks and thinking, ooh, maybe this isn't going to turn out so good for me in 1 or 2 elections' time, who are starting to push for more. And Jim Chalmers did say on Saturday night that there was room for more reform within the Labor offering. And I think that if they don't actually start doing some of that reform, they are going to find out. So if Labor doesn't actually do some of the things that people have hoped for them to do, they are not guaranteed of holding on to power. And yes, they'll win the next election. Will they win the one after that? Will they still be relevant?
I think I want to go next to something else that Jim Chalmers said on election night. I'm pretty sure it was him on the ABC panel talking about, with this thumping majority, that they didn't want to have hubris, which I think is probably a sensible way to approach things. And I think he was kind of talking there, Richard, about how John Howard ended up with balance of power in both houses and ushered in their dearly held mission to destroy workers and the unions with work choices that ended up just going way too far and risked a backlash. Is the lesson there about hubris, or is the lesson there about not implementing shit policies that hurt people?
Yeah, look, I think hubris is bad in any setting, and I think it should be avoided. So I think to encourage the Prime Minister to not show hubris, well, who would advise him otherwise? Let me just take a slight detour on Howard. Howard was up, it was his 4th term, and he finally had the numbers in the Senate. And he did the thing he'd wanted to do his whole career. He introduced work choices. And everyone said, that's going to cost you a lot of votes. He went, yeah, I know. And some people said, that could cost you government. And he said, yeah, I know. He was brave. I'm not saying you liked what he did, but when he had the shot at the thing he'd always wanted to do, he did it. And it's still in place. Okay? Labor have wound back some of it, but when he had the one vote that he needed, he acted like this was his one chance to do the thing he'd always wanted to do. And then in a terrible, terrible outcome for John Howard, not only did he lose, but he destroyed Peter Costello's political career, left office, and Labor never got around to unwinding it. I'm not saying he did it to lose, but when he had the chance to do it, he took it, he did it. And I think this is what we need to understand, that when the coalition are power and they have the chance to do the thing they really want to do, they don't say, oh, I wonder if we can get bipartisan support from Labor, because it wouldn't really be legitimate to do the things we wanted to do without bipartisan support from Labor. So I suppose if it's to have real lasting reform, we should get bipartisan support from Labor. No. Do you remember when John Howard bribed Mal Colston to quit the Labor Party and sit on the crossbench so he would vote to sell Telstra with one vote? So this idea, this is the point Amy was making before, but it's so important. This idea that a Labor government with a majority that can get progressive stuff through the Senate should only get things through the Senate with Liberal support, because that way it's proper, lasting, centrist reform. That's self-imposed constraint. Oh, I wouldn't want to do a nasty deal with the Greens to get it through more progressive than I wanted. it's much more legitimate to do it with the Liberals, and even though it's less than I wanted, that's a purely Labor thought. It's not a thought that John Howard ever had. It's not a thought that Scott Morrison ever had. It's not a thought that Tony Abbott ever had. So, yeah, I think hubris is bad. I don't think any leader, any person should act with too much hubris. But for Labor to think, okay, we've got this majority, the Constitution allows us to implement our party's platform, let's go chat to the Libs and see how they feel about that. You laugh, but that's the only thing that will hold back massive progressive reform. Go tax the gas industry and make dental care free. Go tax the gas industry and make child care free. You know, do whatever you want. We're rich. You've heard me talk before. We can do anything we want. This parliament can do anything it wants, which shouldn't be hubristic, but the idea that, you know, they can't react to circumstances in the next 3 years is bullshit. And why do we know that? Because in the last term, Anthony Albanese said, I won't do it if I didn't promise to do it, until we pushed him on stage 3 tax cuts.
Which turned out to be massively popular.
So we know that he will change his mind under pressure. But let's
From
make from us. But make sure it's progressive pressure, not, you know, the Liberals saying, oh, I'll pass your ledge if you water it down.
Because, I mean, there's no political party that goes to an election saying, we will get rid of Medicare. And why? Because despite the fights that happened in the 1970s and 1980s, Australians would burn this country down if anyone said we're getting rid of Medicare. If they said, okay, you're going to have to pay for your university up front, no HECS, same thing would happen. If they said we don't fund public schools at all anymore, you know, work it out yourselves, fundraise, have a few more sausage sizzles, we would burn it down. So neither party goes to an election with things that at one point were wildly unpopular with one side of politics because they know how popular it is now. The NDIS. Do you think anyone's going to take away the entirety of the NDIS? No, they'll mess with the structure, just like they have Medicare, just like they have public funding for education, just like they have for public funding for health. But they're not going to get rid of the bones of it because it would be so wildly unpopular. And these things are now part of the fabric of Australian society. It's why we think that we're a better nation than other nations. It's one of the things that we point to and say, yes, we're fair. You can educate your kid, you can go to a doctor, you can send someone to university, all in theory, but it shouldn't cost you your house if you've got one. So Labor have all of the goodwill in the world to actually, and I disagree about hubris, and that's because I'm a peacock, but I think that some hubris can be good. I think this idea that every time you have power, you have to be very modest about it. And, oh no, we don't want to upset anyone. Donald Trump, I mean, it seems to be working for his base. If you had a prime minister that just said, no, settle down, Liberal Party and News Corp, this is what people voted for, so we're going to do it. And we answer to the Australian people, not to you. I mean, some would describe that as hubris. I'm sure Paul Kelly would. I would describe that as actively using power in the way that it's been handed to you. But people on the left, they don't use power. Look at what Joe Biden did in his 4 years. Oh no, we can't do these things and I can't sign these, like, you know, presidential orders. Donald Trump walks in, signs 200 in his first hour because he knows how to wield power. And so if we don't actually have a Prime Minister and a Cabinet and a Labor Party with its base fully behind them defending this, saying, yes, you can change the housing market by reforming our taxation system. At the very least, get rid of the capital gains tax discount because it is destroying generations. If you don't lift people out of poverty, if you don't actively act on the climate and stop approving fossil fuel projects, if you don't beef up Medicare so that you can actually afford to go to a doctor. If you don't make retiring contingent on the fact that you've got a house, if you don't make education contingent on your postcode, if they don't start changing those things, then what hope do we have? So I think we do have the right to have some hubris, because we should all be hoping for better. And every single time any of us criticise Labor, we always get people come back to us and say, oh, but they did do this and they did do that and they're doing what is politically possible. Okay, cool. But all of those excuses about what is politically possible are now gone. So the only thing standing in the way of Labor is Labor.
Can I ask if you've got a question, you want to come up here and start lining up? And can I also just get a show of hands? It was a pretty big election result. Hands up if you're feeling positive about what can be done in the next 3 years of Parliament.
What can be done?
Woohoo!
Yeah, what can be done? And how many of you are at the moment, and after kind of what we've been talking about a little, how many of you are feeling confident that Labor will use the power it's been given to implement some of its platform? Yeah, a few are. Okay, cool, just checking. First question.
So, hello, thank you very much. Amy, you answered one of my questions, but a broader question, I mean, there was this whole series of bills and things that happened in the last sort of 6 months of last year around the salmon farming and the Gambling Act and the changes to the EBCA Act and the environmental changes, and then that electoral reform bill that went through that has basically done what it's done. Do you reckon Labor's going to be able to come up and internally re-reform that and go off on a new path?
They very easily could, and if they don't put the bill through...
I didn't ask a hypothetical.
Yep. Whether they will. I mean, that is going to depend on how they settle this grace period, I think, whether they actually will. There is appetite within the party. I mean, while they won all of Tasmania except for Clark, there was a pretty big fright for them in the seat of Franklin. And they have been frightened by the amount of people who have turned up to anti-salmon farming protests, and they've been frightened by how it's taken hold of the national conversation as well. And they also know that younger people are pretty angry with them over what they did with the nature positive laws, which was to put in place like an environmental protection agency that actually could do something. And in terms of what they've done with the crossbench, well, the electoral reforms, I say that in inverted commas, that doesn't actually take effect until the next election. And there is quite a lot of rumbling over how unfair that it is actually going to be. Whether or not they do it is going to tell you about the direction that Labor is headed in internally with its own soul in the party, because there is all the opportunity in the world. They don't even have to put the bill in themselves. They can support something that somebody else puts in the Senate, for instance. But whether or not they actually use that power to reform the things that they said that they, oh boy, I wish I could do this if only we had the power. I don't know if I can answer that question this early.
Just quickly, I heard Katie Gallagher asked about what she thought about an extra senator for the ACT, which Labor were supportive of early in their last term. And disappointingly, her answer was, well, that's an interesting question. We'll need to talk to the Liberal Party about that. And this is the trick that everyone needs to, basically Labor are in a position to pass a bill through the House whenever they want. And frankly, whenever they don't want to pass a bill through the Senate, they will structure it in a way they can blame the Liberals for voting it down.
Give the Liberals a veto.
So the Liberals can be given a veto by Labor, and I fear, well, early days, but yeah, can we change our voting system in a way that would be fairer for Canberra? Let me just check with the Liberals. No, you just won a thumping majority, and you can pass a bill through the Senate in multiple directions. Why wouldn't you get what you say you want through? And it's this bipartisan instinct, this conservative instinct that hopefully evaporates.
Next question.
Thank you. Thank you. The Australian far right is underdeveloped politically. We see it well advanced in Europe and other places. Given that we expect Labor to keep on being Labor, large and increased inequality is going to be locked in. We've got 4 more years of Trumpism. We've got neo-Nazis on the street who believe they own Anzac Day. Political far right is a weird, disparate group of bits and sort of Remeikis and sort of whatnot. Not a question about the Liberal Party, but what is the risk that given that Labor owns the centre right, they bring political organisation and sort of and organise the far right, and we're 1 or 2 elections away from an Australian AFD?
Look, I think that the best way to protect ourselves against that is for Labor to have a big, positive, popular agenda that makes most Australians think, shit, the government's making my life better. You know, and I think that, again, collect tax from the gas industry, spend it on services that people like, and Labor can govern forever. You know, but if, yes, you do nothing or you tinker at the edges and inequality and anger continues to build up, then, you know, understand that the reason Trump won was that Americans feared the status quo more than they feared Trump. They wanted change. And Biden saying, but look how good I did, and it'll be like that and just slightly better. And then Kamala coming along and saying the same thing. They were like, no, if it's anything like it is, I want out. So I think the best way to protect our society from that is to, you know, keep our preferential election system, which the right will go after, to keep compulsory attendance at a polling place. We don't have compulsory voting. You just have to show up and write you all suck and you can go. No one looks over your shoulder and makes you vote. We just make you show up once every 3 years. That's fine. So I think we need to protect our institutions. I think that's very important. But also I think we need to keep showing people that democracy can work. Democracy can elect governments that makes people's lives better, that takes the heat out of these unnecessary conflicts between people suffering legitimate grievance and disadvantage. Why let the far right be the one saying, I can help you, when we've got, you know, a massive Labor government majority that can say, we can help you.
Yeah, and Australia is more protected from a far right for a couple of reasons. One, the institutions and our voting system, which is a lot more fairer. And 2, it sounds strange to say, but we actually all do owe a debt of gratitude to Pauline Hanson, because she has so comprehensively sucked up all of the space on the far right, but she's so incompetent, she doesn't actually know what to do with it. And so what she's done is basically hold all of that space. There's no airtime for anyone else trying to like get an edgeway in. I mean, even the far right Liberal and National senators have to basically share a panel with Pauline Hanson where everyone just agrees with each other about how much they love each other. They can't get any sort of airtime unless they're in there with Pauline Hanson. I think some of the danger in what we're going to see emerge is exactly what Richard says. If you don't actually address the growing discontent within Australian society, you are going to see people turn to the disruptors who will. And there is a chance, particularly now that Peter Dutton has left a power vacuum in the Queensland LNP, where he's basically held court for the last, certainly, decade, but also in the coalition itself, where he obviously has more conservative views, but has been enough of a political animal to understand that he can't always let them follow their worst instincts, that he's held them at bay. There is a chance that there could be a charismatic, you know, seemingly sensible person. Matt Canavan, yeah. I said charismatic. Yeah, Tim Wilson potentially.
Tim with a suntan.
No longer a moderate. Who could fill that void. I don't think they exist in the political spectrum in everyone's consciousness. I think Andrew Hastie could potentially emerge if he continues down like his fundamental path that he's taken. But it's not going to happen in the near future, because everywhere that you've named, it's been because there has been no changes to society other than bad ones, and people were looking for disruptions. Australia is also kind of protected because we've had our election, same with Canada, at a time where you're seeing the impact of an authoritarian in a democracy like Trump, what that can do. It's also taken some of the heat off, strangely, in Europe, where we've seen like fascist parties start to have this weird sort of come to Jesus moment about what nationalism actually is and what it means, because the threat now isn't necessarily, you know, refugees. The threat is that America is going to completely abandon Europe and leave them at Russia's mercy. And so you are seeing some of a natural arresting of that far-right movement as people start to think, oh no, we actually need to protect our nations. And we did see that in Canada and Australia as well. But I think ultimately, if Labor do not improve people's lives materially, they allow that anger to fester, then there is a chance that the far right does come to political prominence. I just don't think it's going to be in this next election term.
But can I really just thank you for that question, because I think too, we don't want to be complacent about it either. And just because, you know, we've got these protections in place, it really does say something that those neo-Nazis felt comfortable enough to have that protest. It's only a few years since an Australian massacred a bunch of Muslim people in New Zealand. You know, like, we do have these serious problems, and it's really important that nobody is complacent about the danger that poses. So that's a really great question. Next question, thank you.
Thanks. So the National Party hasn't really been mentioned, so I just wondered if you could fill us in on their vote and where they're sitting. Thanks.
The National Party are crowing within the coalition that they've done quite well, that they may take Bendigo. They have suffered in terms of their vote, but have held largely all of their seats, and they're claiming that as a major, major victory, despite, they thought they'd win Calare back and didn't, but they also thought that they were about to lose Calper, so they got a bit of a scare there. And they got a bit of a scare in like heartland seats in the LNP, like Hinkler and Capricornia. But they're basically on a victory tour at the moment within the coalition, so much to the point that they're talking of separating from the Liberal Party because they feel that they've compromised too much Liberals, despite having all of their policies become coalition policies. And I think that is a question as to the future of the coalition within Australian politics. Whether it remains a coalition as a formal coalition, because it's no longer two parties. It's now just basically one party that's being driven by like the ring of the bull by the National Party. And that is why they came up with nuclear, which is something that the Liberals had rejected under Scott Morrison. They brought it back because the Nationals thought it would be a really good idea. And I mean, it's had some like good policies in terms of coming up with like a gas reservation in Australia, and also breaking up the duopolies that came from the Nationals. But the way that it's been pushed through the coalition has meant that it's the worst possible good policy you could do. Always the worst possible versions. So I think the Nationals, who have lost a senator, and whose median age is around, I'm going to say 60, maybe 65, they are feeling quite cocky at the moment, and they're deciding that they are going to be the ones who should decide the direction of the coalition, which has the Liberals going, actually, should we even still be a party? And the Nationals saying, actually, we think we might be better off without you guys. Again, pointing to the irrelevancy of them as a massive political force, although if they did split, they could be their own power block in the Senate.
Yeah, just on that, so at the moment, let's assume Labor need 11, maybe 10 seats to pass a bill through the Senate. 10 right-wing senators could form their own right-wing Senate club and have a great 3 years playing balance of power in the Senate and not going to the meeting with Tim Wilson about anything. No, but that's because if they're in a formal coalition, they have to do all of that at the same time. So it's really tricky, I think. And I mean this numerically. It's pretty funny the Libs have let it happen. The Nats have forced the Libs to adopt positions that are so unpopular that the Libs just keep losing and losing and losing. So the percentage the Nats make up of the coalition just keeps growing and growing because the Libs keep losing and losing. So the Nats are becoming the dominant part of the coalition because they're so good at costing Liberals their seats.
Next question.
You sort of touched on my question in a previous answer, but I might as well ask it anyway. I was in the queue. To what extent was the Trump factor decisive in the election, with Dutton wanting to sack public servants, Jacinta Price proudly wearing a MAGA cap? It clearly was decisive in Canada, but to what extent was it a factor in our election?
I think it was a very big factor. The Australia Institute did some polling soon after Trump was elected, and we asked people, who do you think the major threat to Australia is? Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping or Donald Trump? And more Australians chose Donald Trump. And that was soon after he was elected. And that poll's been done by other people quite a bit now, but we updated ours just before the election, and it's risen. I think Australians, as Amy said before, you know, Trump is scary for America, and you know, American friends ask me the strangest questions these days. It is not a nice place over there at the moment, and they're a real threat to the global order. I mean, he's been serious about Panama and Greenland and Canada. But I think in Australia, people had time to just look at that and think, that guy's nuts. And that sounded funny when he was running for office. It's not funny now that he's in office. And I mean, remember, it's only 6 months ago, the Oz and the right-wing media were talking about the Trump bump and how Trump winning was going to be so good for Dutton. You know, that's how short-sighted the sort of media analysis is. So I think Trump was significant for lots of reasons. He showed people how crazy a crazy right-winger can be. He made people think, yeah, the world's a scary place. Maybe I do need to take this shit a bit more seriously. And again, to Amy's point, I think Trump has shown in Canada, less so in Australia, but I think we'll see more of it. I think you're going to see progressive nationalism. All right, in Australia, nationalism has a lot of right-wing pejoratives, as Amy said, you know, punching down on refugees. So nationalism in Australia has been punching down. But in Canada, nationalism now is punching up. It's like, we have to stick together to protect us from that guy. And that's not a bad version of nationalism. It's not exceptionalism. It's not racist. It's like, hang on, the only people who are going to look after our interests are us. So we better figure out what we've got in common, or that guy is going to hurt us. And yeah, I think you'll see more of that in Australia. And I think an easy example of positive progressive nationalism is, why are we giving so much gas away to foreign gas companies? Like, let's be nationalist and make tens of billions of dollars a year at their expense. Sign me up.
For those who love the TikToks of campaigns, the Donald Trump comparison was hurting Peter Dutton. They realised that when that press conference happened with Zelensky, when it seemed that Trump was abandoning Ukraine and backing in Russia, the infamous, like, why don't you say thank you press conference. That's the moment where they started going, oh boy, maybe we should start pulling back from this. But by then it was too late. The Timu Trump label hurt them. That was my tweet.
I was going to say, who thought that up? Yeah.
Sorry to the Liberals who thought that a tweet
name calling
could
is
go.
not okay, Amy.
It is when I do it. Yeah, so that really did hurt them. That was popping up in their focus groups. And just because it rang true, and because of, you know, he appointed a minister, you know, for government efficiency, despite already having a shadow minister for government waste, which was Jane Stevens, who's no longer in the parliament.
Government waste and government efficiency,
It's
two
two
totally
exceptionally different things, yeah. The public servant thing really hurt them because of its links to Trump as well, and also because in Australia, the public service since COVID has had a bit of a bump where everyone's realised that actually it does help to have a bureaucracy that's strong and capable of working even when the government doesn't sit. So, and the tariffs also also really hurt them, because Peter Dutton didn't have a response to that. As Richard has said, that it just seemed like Peter Dutton was sad that the tariffs weren't worse, and so that he couldn't come out with some, we would never have gotten these, because Australia got what, you know, turned out to be the best deal in the world, and he was unable to say what he would do differently. He was basically saying we would do everything that the government would do but beg more, and that did not play well with the public. So the Trump stuff, and that was an active decision by the Labor campaign to hold the election later on the hope that some of Trump's policies would start to filter through into people's consciousness, and that the Trump bump would disappear and instead turn to basically people being repulsed, and that's exactly what happened. So Labor actually did deserve credit for holding their nerve.
And I don't think it necessarily impacted the campaign or the vote, but I'm actually really interested long term in how that Zelensky press conference impacts how we think about AUKUS and our security alliance with the United States.
It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine.
We say thank you all the time. So we give them $300 billion to build their own shipyards.
But if that's, you know, how our biggest security partner treats its allies in a real conflict, like it really, I think it makes people think twice about the value of that. Next question.
Thank you. Most Australians end up viewing elections through the lens of media, and with Kerry Stokes at 7, Channel 9 Fairfax, which used to have Peter Costello as its head before he pushed over a journalist in the city, and Murdoch, it would be idealistic to the point of delusional to say that our media is fully independent and non-biased. So my question is, do you believe in this election cycle the media was angling for a Labor majority, Labor minority, Liberal minority, or Liberal majority government in general?
I know we just did some research on literally how the papers endorsed, but I didn't see the results, and I was hoping.
I know we're doing it, but I haven't seen the results.
So, you know, like
Coming soon.
The editorials that come out on the Saturday before an election, someone in the office was analysing them today. I think they were surprisingly pro-Dutton, but it actually shows over the last 15 years how regularly the papers are pro-conservative. That shouldn't surprise anyone who reads the papers.
It might shock you all to learn that Shari Markson endorsed Peter Dutton.
And still he didn't win. So it's a good question, but I just think that, as I said at the beginning, I mean this, I've said this repeatedly this week, I've got a piece in the New Daily, so's Amy, sort of same argument, different funny lines, about how important it is we don't get our heads stuck on the Liberals. It's also really important we don't keep our heads stuck on News Corp and right-wing media. Not because they don't have power, not because they don't have influence, but because if we exaggerate the amount of that influence, then we end up governing ourselves again. We restrict ourselves. So the analogy I use, you know, if you think about, you know, the Courier Mail, one paper town in Brisbane, Herald Sun, dominant newspaper in Melbourne, Courier Mail had no luck getting Labor out for 10 years. Right, the Herald Sun didn't lay a glove on Daniel Andrews, who just soared through. No, it's really important. Like, don't tell yourself that News Corp attacking a government means they're stuffed. So here's how I think of News Corp these days. Does anyone remember the cartoon Scooby-Doo? And remember how there was always a ghost and everyone was scared, but then it just turned out to be the property developer and they pull the mask off, and it wasn't very scary anymore once you pull the mask off? Well, we just saw 3 years of News going as hard as they could against Labor. And what happened to Labor's vote? What happened to the Libs? So, yes, you're right. The media in Australia, the traditional media, whatever you want to call it, is quite conservative. And even the progressive media outlets are actually, bipartisanship good, centrism is good. But almost no one's reading it. And even the people who read it clearly aren't that persuaded by it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with News Corp is that everyone always thought that they had power over elections, because News Corp especially with the daily tabloids, used to be really good at reading the tea leaves, and then backing in the final weeks the candidate that was going to win. And then when they won, saying, we did that, we installed you, we put you there, we can take you out. And for a really long time, the political class believed that. But then Rupert Murdoch had, I don't know, a Rupert Murdochism, and decided that they were never going to do that again, that they were just going to back the candidate that he wanted to win or that the organisation wanted to win. And they should have lost their cultural relevancy then, because they kept backing in losers. But because they were basically had convinced an entire generation of the political class that they had power to install people and they had power to pull them out, same with 2GB and Alan Jones, he did much the same thing, that you basically had an entire generation of politicians, no matter where they came from on the political spectrum, kowtowing, kissing the ring and saying, oh yes, no, you did install us. There was the famous stories of how Kevin Rudd refused to meet Rupert Murdoch and look what happened to him. Well, what happened to him was Labor. That's what happened to him. You know, that was politics. That had nothing to do with the influence or non-influence of News Corp. And so hopefully now with this election, we can start to break our own consciousness away from the cultural relevancy, the outdated, outweighed cultural relevancy that we give to organisations like News Corp. Because let's take like Kate Chaney, who was considered to be one of the weakest teals ahead of the election. Everyone was telling you Kate Chaney's going to lose. She had the full force of the gas industry against her. She had the full force of Kerry Stokes. She had, News Corp running some stories. She had Gina Reinhart talking negatively about her. There was so much money paid, so much influence used to try and unseat Kate Chaney, and it didn't work. And in Fremantle, there very well could be an independent elected who basically almost won the state seat with the same things, where she was saying, actually, we should be taxing our gas industry and we should be pushing back against Seven West and we should be pushing back against all these things. She almost won the state seat, didn't win that, said, okay, I might go federal, and she's almost won the federal seat in her first tilt. So the influence of these things are only as important as much credit as we give them. I like to think of them not as Scooby-Doo, as like voodoo. It only works if you believe in it. And I think the less people who believe in it, the less power it has over politicians. At the moment, and not to talk about the Liberal Party, but one of the biggest issues within the Liberal Party, and I've spoken to many a departed Liberal MP or senator who all said the same thing. The issue for them was that they would go to Parliament, they would go back, they would go do their branch meetings, and in every single branch meeting, they would be greeted by 90% of the branch telling them that Andrew Bolt said that they should be doing this, Peter Credlin said they should be doing this, Shari Markson said they should be doing this, and why are they not doing that? And they were trying to say, well, we're trying to make policy. And they're like, no, Andrew Bolt says you need to do this. And so they couldn't even win the arguments within their own branches, and they ended up leaving. So if the Liberal Party wants to be ruled by Sky After Dark, that's fine, but you shouldn't be.
If people will allow just a few more minutes, we've only got one final question, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
John Worker, Rising Tide. One of the power bases I don't heard more was about the vested interests. Thinking in fossil fuels particularly, mining, pubs and clubs, big pharma maybe, business council, that type of thing. And especially as you talked about News Corporation, which was there, if you don't play with us, we'll get sick News Corporation on you. Where do you think they both... Actually, what power will they have, and maybe what power they will still perceive voodoo-like that they might have? And just before you start, we hope to have an Australia Institute representative speak at our film launch next month. Thank you.
Excellent. I'll consider that an invite, and one of us will, I'm sure, will be happy to come. Look, water kind of has a habit of running down the path that water ran down before. That's why the Grand Canyon's so deep. The problem in a democracy is, where power's been before, it kind of tends to follow the same routes. That's why, it's so important that we kind of take a breath and step back and look. Because if we just do politics as usual, then, oh no, the Business Council's on the front page of the Australian saying Labor really better do good reform on tax or productivity will fall. And like, fuck off. Just, you're a loser, mate. Just go away. We don't care. No, this is really important, right? We have to own this. Who cares? And all of them just lined up as hard as they could behind Dutton and went backwards 12 seats. Ooh, scary. Watch out, they don't do that again. Right? So I'm not saying they have no power. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying the fossil fuel industry doesn't have any power. I'm not saying the BCA doesn't have any power. I'm not saying they don't have any influence. But the more of us, the more people in Labor, the more people in the Greens, the more people in the media who exaggerate that power, the harder it will be to figure out that, hang on, you know what most people are happy with? Tax the gas industry, spend money on me. Winning. 70% of coalition voters, 70% of coalition voters think that we shouldn't export so much gas. 80% of climate skeptics think we shouldn't export much gas. So is going after the gas industry a left-wing thing? Right, you got to get it out of your head. Like, what's Pauline Hanson going to do when Labor says, how about we stop exporting all our gas? How about we tax the bejesus out of it? What are the nationalists going to do when Labor does something, if and when Labor does something popular like that? So, yeah, I think we just have to be really careful to take a breath and think, no, if things have changed, then I don't have to go back to politics as usual. And in addition to that, again, to make Amy's point again, the gas industry threw everything it could at Kate Chaney and lost. So they're not that powerful, are they? But if we all keep telling ourselves they are, and if we all say, oh, but they donate money to Labor, therefore they're in charge of Labor, therefore we can't change anything, just stop it. Just stop it. A couple of $100,000 from the gas industry to Labor is not explaining anything. If a couple of $100,000 to Labor would change their climate policy, I could raise them $20 million by the end of the week. No, I'm not kidding. It's so much worse than they made a donation, right? It's cultural. It's wired into their heads. The couple of $100,000, sure, we get it out of politics. It's not doing any good. But again, I promise you, if a couple of $100,000 could buy a major political party's whole agenda, stick 3 zeros on it and I'll go raise it. Right? So if we keep telling ourselves, I'm not saying you are, that the fossil fuel industry is all powerful or the BCA is all powerful, then we'll be timid for 3 years. No, I know. Yeah, good.
I think, sorry, I know we're running over time, but there is a huge opportunity here to actually properly shift power. So you're already starting to see it in the media, right? Like a bunch of the people in the gallery have clocked on and gone, holy shit, we've got at least 6 years of Labor. And that is not something I can tell you that anyone in the gallery has previously thought about. It's not. We've voted in Conservative government so often and so like clockwork that there's always been the thought, whether it's conscious or not, that the Conservatives are going to be back, so therefore we have to maintain our contacts, we have to maintain them leading the conversation, we have to maintain their influence over, the narrative. You are starting to already see the shift in the media. You've got in the Fin Review, them questioning whether the Liberal Party even has a soul to save. There is 6 years of Labor. That will change the reporting, because they will be going to Labor and actually allowing a Labor government to run the narrative for the first time, I think, since Whitlam. So that is going to be a shift, and the ABC will probably have to catch up, but they're always the last ones to make these sort of adjustments. But that is huge for you guys as well, because you now have even more influence than you did before. Sure, you've got your votes, but now you also have a louder voice that you can use, and there is going to be more people willing to listen to you, because the government is supposed supposed to be listening to you. And the media doesn't know that the government doesn't always listen to people who consider themselves to be more on the left, but the media thinks that they do. So suddenly you've got your own voice, your own influence, and you can shape some of these conversations in ways that we have not been able to shape them in decades. So go out there, be very loud, be very strong, and be right in what you're saying. And you might actually start to see some of these very deeply held narratives start to shift in this country.
And be ambitious, I think, would be the final message. Richard likes to say democracy thrives on high expectations. And we at the Australia Institute certainly plan to raise people's expectations for what this next parliament can achieve. Please give our panel a round of applause. I want to thank everyone who joined us here in person this evening, and anyone who joined us live on the live stream. Hand in the room if you're one of the many, many people in Australia who thinks Donald Trump is a bit of a threat to Australian security. Fab. I've got some wonderful news for you. The Australia Institute has launched a new seasonal essay series called Vantage Point. And the very first issue is, I think, on sale from tomorrow. It's called After America by Dr. Emma Shortis, and it's a real serious look at what the Trump presidency means for Australia and our security relationship, and how we can chart a bit of a more independent course, and examining some of those big issues that presidency is throwing up for Australia. It's available for $19.95, or you can become a foundation subscriber in a limited time only offer. And you'll get 4 issues for the price of 3, $59.95. You can do that on our website at australiainstitute.org.au.
Who's writing the second one, Eb?
That might be my wonderful colleague, Dr. Richard Dennis. Richard, what is your second issue of Vantage Point on?
It's called Dead Centre, on how centrism is holding us back.
So that's my pitch to become a foundation subscriber. You can't do better than that. Dr. Emma Shortis on Trump and Richard Dennis on Dead Centre. And I also wanted to mention that everyone here this evening, you should come back next month, because Dr. Emma Shortis will be our guest at Politics in the Pub. So thank you all so much for coming out this evening. I hope you've enjoyed the evening. And one last plug, if you'll allow me, before we go. Many of you will have bought our very first book from Australia Institute Press, What's the Big Idea? We've all been talking tonight about being courageous and ambitious for the next parliament. What's the Big Idea has 32 different amazing contributors and authors who all wrote a chapter for that book about amazing ideas that could change the country. And we've got a brand new podcast called What's the Big Idea, hosted by Paul Barclay, formerly of ABC Big Ideas, talking to a lot of those contributors. It's free wherever you normally listen to podcasts. The first episode of that is from Richard Dennis. The second one is about climate change from Polly Hemming, but there's some amazing contributors to that as well. And I think it'll give us all some incredible ideas for just how ambitious we can be in this next parliament. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope to see you all back here. Well, I won't see you back here next month. I think I might be on holidays, but everyone else, we'd love to see you back. Thanks again for coming out.